Well, it's running. I'm going to tell a story. I've been kind of going over my memories for many years about something that happened to me at middle age. I'm still not going to be wearing a shirt, but about all that you're going to be able to see is my face anyway, and my scruffy beard. But at any rate, I figured I would tell the story and see if I could get it on YouTube so somebody would recognize some of the characters and some of the things that happened to me. But I wrote this thing in 3 parts to begin with. I called it Middletown 7, and the second was Mitsuko 3, and the third one was Susan Mitsuko 5. Those are the revisions that I went through, and finally I decided that it really looked like I needed to get all of these 3 into one place, and so I could write the story out. And I've pretty much got it written out, but I want to tell you the story, see how it goes, at least the first part of the story anyway. I wound up in a place called Middletown, Arkansas. And one day I was sitting in the shade, and I really remember that day. I'd just gone to town to see if my local supermarket had sushi and Mexican bread, bolillos. They're very popular in the Midwest and Southwest, and it's one of my favorites. So I was sitting there in the grass in front of the house. I was kind of lamenting the fact that civilization had not yet arrived in Middletown. I couldn't find any sushi or bolillos. So at any rate, I'll go back a little bit to show you how I wound up in Middletown. I had made a lot of money in my 20s and early 30s, and I decided that I needed to spend some of it. So I got a hold of the money with legal means. I didn't steal it or anything like that, but I had a lot of money. Whatever the source, I had taken a map of the USA, and I just kind of, on a whim, stuck a pin in the map, and it wound up sticking right in the middle of this small town in Arkansas called Middletown. I thought it might as well be there as someplace up in West Virginia. So I got packed up a little bit in my XB Scion, a really nice car, and it did me good, even though it had been wrecked once. I decided to just jump in the car and go see what Middletown had to say. So I got in Middletown, and I spotted this real estate office, and it was kind of a place that looked like it was a typical middle America kind of a place. So I pulled into the dirt parking lot in front of the place, and I had some negative thoughts, but actually I joked because this was a respectable joint. As I walked in the front door, it became obvious that this place had at least one thing going for it. I I wasn't able to smell any cigarette smoke, which is like typical, I think, of some real estate places. So instead of that, it was actually really spotless. The place was really clean. And it smelled good, too. It's like I looked over and there was a big toaster oven, and it had a couple of trays of goat meal cookies cooking, and it really smelled nice. And I thought I may have selected a winner. So I'm going to stop for a second, and I'm going to tell you that some of the story I'm going to tell you I wasn't really aware of until much, much later. I found out about some of these things just by talking to people later on. And as I walked in the door, there were some things going on in the background that I had no idea of. It was a back room with several displays around a central desk in the back room of this real estate office. And his voice says, "He's here. Looks like he made good time from Phoenix. Notify his dad that he's here and we're going to show him Prime." "Yes, he's here, Mac. Yes, you're welcome. We'll be in touch. Okay, bye-bye." So now we get back to the story. He says, earlier I got into town, and before I wound up at the real estate office, I noticed this really kind of a nice-looking motel, 2-story and all that. I wound up getting a room there, and then I went searching for a local real estate office, and so I finally wound up there. I had walked in, I'd smelled the cookies, and the PA clicked on, and this female voice says, "Have a cookie, have a seat, relax and take a load off. I'll be right out." It sounded really nice. So I did. I had a cookie. I burned my fingers, poured a cup of coffee, which turned out to be one of the best cups of coffee I'd ever had. And it came from a pot that kind of filled itself up as I poured. And I grabbed the cookie and sat down at this kind of a kitchen table off on the side, and I demolished that cookie. In fact, I went back for another. And as I was eating the last of this second cookie, I was taking my fingertip and getting all the little crumbs off the table, and I'm kind of like that. Nobody was watching anyway. So I heard this door open in the back, and then footsteps came up. And I looked over, and there was a hallway going into the back of the building. And heard the footsteps come in, and this really good-looking young lady kind of came in the room and walked up to me and said, Hi, Mac, I'm Sharon. I don't know this gal from anybody. I'd never met this woman at all, and I kind of did a double take, and she says, "Oh, I'm sorry." She says, "I got your name from your driver's license, from the driver's." Start again. Got your name from the license plate on your car. She says, "I've got all these records, and I got too many, so that's where I got your name from." So she sits in the chair next to me, and we just sort of evaluate each other, and so she had a nice looking pose, and she was like sitting kind of sideways to me, and I looked at her, and there were some parts of her that I really liked. And so she turned to me and she says, "How can I help you?" So I really, I couldn't figure out what to look at, her face or her boobs. She had a nice figure. So at any rate, I thought she looked like a farmer's daughter, a milkmaid kind of a gal that lived out that was born and raised out in the country and had this really healthy look. And so at any rate, excuse me. Turned out later on, she took me out to her mom and dad's place, and they did in fact have cow manure on their working boots. They had a dairy, and had a lot of cows, and they had kind of like a milk factory. And so I met Elizabeth, Sharon's mother. And I had a really nice visit. But at any rate, I digress. Sharon waited for a response as to what she could do for me. And I coughed once, and I told her I was looking for a middle-sized house in town or out in the country to establish residence. She then asked for my budget. I told her there wasn't any. But I expected a nice 4-bedroom with acreage in relatively new condition. I said, if it's in the country, I would rather have, I would like to have one with some Quonset huts and a pole barn or two. And I said I wasn't really ready for animals of any sort, except for resident cats and dogs. So, and I said, if it's out in the country, I'd appreciate guidance on somebody who could be a caretaker for the place. I felt like if it was some acreage, I didn't want to spend all my time being a farmer, because I'd never done that. So I said a caretaker would be really nice. So she was kind of looking at me, and I was looking at her as I was talking. So all of a sudden, the printer in the back room stopped. And I turned my head, and I toward the absence of sound, which it's like that's what happens. So, and I looked out the corner of my eye, and I could see that she reacted as well. She knew that whatever was going on in the background looked like it was finished, and so she says, "Can I get you some more coffee?" And I said, "Sure." So she picked my coffee cup up and went over to the coffee machine. And when she came back, it was perfect. It was really good coffee. I usually use like 3 tablespoons of coffee creamer, and she had apparently put that in, and it was really good. So I heard this door open in the back down this hallway. And more steps came down, and this kind of middle-aged woman came in with a big folder under her, in her hands. So she walked over to Sharon and handed her this folder, and Sharon took the folder and opened it up and took a look at the first couple of 3 pages, and it appeared to be okay. So she looked at her compatriot and nodded and dismissed her, and away she went. Sharon says, "Would you like to take a ride?" And I said, sure, yeah, we'll do that. So I kind of cleaned up the mess of the cookies, and we both got up and walked down this hallway out to the back, and it was like a big, almost like a pole barn on the back of this building, and I noticed there was several limousine type vehicles and a couple each of really nice Ferraris and a couple of Mercedes. And instead of getting in one of those, she walks me over to this nondescript kind of gray sedan. She says, "Get in," and she got in the driver's seat, got the engine started, and they kind of backed out of her hole, and the end of the building sort of just like diminished, and it was gone. It wasn't any big doors or anything. It was like it just sort of all of a sudden was gone. And I kind of was like shaking my head, like I don't believe what I saw. So Sharon noticed, and she says, "Oh, it's some new technology the company has found recently, so we decided to try it out here." Well, impress me. So it's like we got out on this street. It was about the first quarter mile away from the real estate office, and then it got out on more of a main drag out of town and wound up heading out to the northwest around the end of this big mountain. And I recall this mountain looked like what remains when a bottom dump truck releases the gravel, and it comes up in this kind of a shaped pile of a shaped long pile of gravel. That's what this mountain looked like. And it's kind of like in the Shenandoahs and there's some areas in Virginia and in North Carolina and on down through there, which looks like that. Well, that's what this mountain looked like as we drove along around the eastern end of it, and then out through a kind of a flat. There were some farms around and all this, and eventually down about what I would kind of estimate as to be about a half of the mountain, turned off to the left, and there's a gate there. The gate post had a green light on it that was flashing. As we drove up, the gate opened. It's like usually you'll have to do something like enter a key or a code on a keypad or something like that. So at any rate, it opened up immediately, and I looked in the rearview mirror, and I could see the light turning red again, and the gate goes down. So we drove up kind of the side of this mountain, kind of slopey up, but like in and out of the little kind of ravines on the side of a normal mountain. Well, this one had normal kind of little ravines that had little creeks through them as it rained. So we finally got up to the top of the mountain, drove along a little ways, and then there came a nice flat area that overlooked the interior of that valley, and it turned out the valley was like what formed the top of this mountain. It wasn't just a kind of flat mountain. It had a like a big cavity all along the thing, down about 200 feet from the tallest point of this linear mountain. And so we got out, and I liked the place. The mountain just was nice and green. It was in early summer, and everything was really green in Arkansas. So Sharon and I got out, and we were just kind of looking around, and Sharon moved around behind me and took me by the hips, and she pointed me down the valley toward the southeast end. And she pointed out this kind of an odd quadrangle way off in the distance. It was like 4 or 5 miles at least down. In fact, it was probably farther than that. But at any rate, you could see this odd quadrangle of and that was kind of outlined with a clear-cut space all around the whole perimeter. And when she showed me this, I thought, this is what she's going to show me. And it really looked nice. And it's like she says, this whole mountain is hereabouts is kind of known as like a haunted kind of a place. She says people don't like it up here. And she says that actually all the land around this mountain is like almost junk. And she says to move certain properties, the sellers have to include a lot of the wooded areas along with the cleared areas of the farm in order to move the properties. She says this quadrangle is about 1,400 acres. And she says it's like about 400 acres is cleared, and the rest up on the southeast side of the mountain, the side of the bowl, is about another 1,000 acres. So she says the whole place can be had right now for $1.4 million. And I looked at this. This was a big deal. It's like $1.4 million. She says that it has a main house on it. It's got some guest cottages and 7 major buildings. There were several pole barns and at least one Quonset. Well, that's what I was looking for. If it was going to be out in the country, I might as well have all this stuff. It's like, why not? So at any rate, she mentioned again that the place, a lot of the locals thought that there was something to all the odd lights and stuff that flew around at night. And she says most farmers are going to be in bed sleeping when all this activity is going on. But she says the seller wants you to know this fact that it's probably not a good area to be in, but she says, I have to tell you this. So I said, well, let's go see this jewel. So we got back in the sedan and a short time later drove up to the farm gate. And then we had to type in a few keys and the door opened. And we drove up this short curving lane up to this brick 2-story house. And I thought to myself, unless the world ends, this is going to be where I'm going to call home. Beautiful place. Well, we got out and walked up to the door, and the front door of the house opened up, and this guy and a young girl comes out and stands on the porch. And they were waiting for us, and Sharon and I walked up on the porch and got within like an arm's length of these two. And she says, you ask about a caretaker. This is them. This is Shelley. Shelley and Mark. Shelley and Mark Carpenter. And then Sharon says, where's Mom? And Mark said that, well, she had a chore to do and she'll be here presently. Well, about that time the door opens and Gracie, found out later her name was Gracie. Gracie walks out and joined us on the porch. I shook her hand, and I just I'm kind of an affectionate kind of a guy, so I just kind of dropped her hand and just reached out my arms and pulled her in, and I gave her a big hug. And I had this feeling of home. Well, she hugged me back, and then when we finally broke, I felt like maybe she looked a little flushed. But at any rate, I enjoyed that. Well, Shelley, standing in the background by her father, saw this, and she says, wow. So she walked around her mother and walked up into me and gave me a big hug, too. I thought this was probably a good thing. And then we talked a couple of minutes, and Mark stepped up and gave me a nice handshake. He had a nice, firm, farmer's kind of a handshake. And he said a few words, and so it's like they made me comfortable. Sharon, remember Sharon? She says, let's. So we all walked in the house, and Shelley and Mark went on into the kitchen, and Sharon escorted me into the dining room. And we sat down at this big table. And she says, she unfolded this folder, and she says, that I might be interested in some of this. Yeah. She says the company firm has a section that can produce these things. She said, I may be surprised, but there are some things she needs to explain. I said, I'm all ears. I had no idea what was going on, but I thought I had nothing to lose. Sharon had quite a story to tell. She says, as soon as my car wound up in the parking lot in front of her real estate office, they had optics on a couple of poles in the parking lot that took pictures of my license on the car, and they did a quick search, and she says, we have a large portion, maybe not large portion, but a large department in our organization that does all this stuff. And she says, while we were eating cookies and coffee, she says they looked at my record and everything that was available on me to find out if it was worth the risk to them to offer to show me this property here and to evaluate whether or not they could actually do it and not risk exposing everything. I didn't know what was going on, but I said, yeah, okay. So I got a bug here. She opened the file and took out the second page, and it didn't really have much on this second page, but it said something like that I swore to be bound by certain Secrets Act, and I swear to abide by any others which may be communicated to me. I signed it. I have no idea why I signed the thing, because I hadn't been invited to even see the place or to place an offer on it or anything. And I kind of felt like I was being rushed a little bit. But again, I kind of felt like that this was really something that I needed to sign. I just had this feeling. So Sharon says, let's go take a look. So she gathered up all the documents after I'd signed it and she'd witnessed the thing. We kind of went out, we took a look around the house a little bit, and then went out to see a couple of the outbuildings, and next door to the main house was a pool house. Nice pool, big building. Saw like I said, saw a couple of the pole barns and a Quonset hut. As we came back, she was leading, and she stopped alongside this kind of a gazebo area, kind of a place where you could do some outdoor cooking. And she turned around and she says, "Yes or no?" I said, "Yes." She continued, she says, Are you prepared to move today? I replied, like as in move in today? Yes, in all ways move in. I said, I'm there. The answer is yes, my kind of place. Sharon took a small pouch out of this folder, and it had the master and certain other keys and a notebook that shows the codes to the keypads to get into the grounds, into the farm. I grinned at her and I took the pouch. She says, if you want to just go ahead and do this, we can do this right now. She says you can generate an offer and pay for it right here. And I said, if you can do it, let's do it right here. So she says, do you wish to buy this property effective immediately? I replied, yes. She continued, do you approve a funds transfer to consummate the transaction? I replied, yes. She says, it's done. That meant she had a lot of other information about me that I had no idea that anybody but me had. But at any rate, she says you do have 3 days to negate this transaction, but I would advise you not to do that. She continued, and she says the Carpenters have been notified that you are the new owner. How'd she do that? There is one more thing, she says. Do you wish to employ the Carpenters? I replied, sure. She says, okay. You'll be happy to learn that even though the records will show you employ the Carpenters, their salaries are and will be continue to be paid by the firm. They are employees of the firm. Sharon then told me more details. She said that Mark and Gracie were senior members of the staff, and as you grasp more and more of the details, you will understand where they stand in regards to this operation. All three of them may disappear from time to time as part of their duties. I wondered what I'd got myself into. Sharon and I said goodbye to the Carpenters, and after verifying with them that I'd be back the next day with my personal effects to move in, we drove back to Middletown well after dark. Um, Sharon told me that she lived out in the country. So she had some stuff to do in the office. So I sat there and had some more coffee. And after she got finished, we went out to dinner, and I really, really enjoyed her company. It's like we really got along. There were long periods of time where we didn't have much to say, so we just sort of sat there and enjoyed our dinner. And she says, it's kind of interesting. He says, a lot of my dates don't allow me not to talk. And so I thought, well, okay, I can just imagine blah, 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 blah. And at the end of the dinner, it's like you're tired of their company, you're gone. So she says, you ready? I said, I'm done. Let's go. So I left a nice tip and got out in the car, and I turned to her and I said, if you don't mind, we can visit. We can go to the motel. It's just down the street, and we can visit for a while. And she says, that's nice. Okay. So I got out of this old gray sedan, got back in my Scion, and I led the way a little caravan down to the motel. And got into the motel, and we just kind of relaxed and put our feet up on the part of the couch, and things turned nice. So after some time, I said that, it's like after midnight. I said, it's too late for you to drive home. Why don't you stay here with me? So she did. So we got in bed, and about the last thing that happened before she dropped off to sleep was she said, there may be an alert during the night. And I kind of like, without making a big deal out of it, I said, okay. So it's like both of us got to sleep, and then all of a sudden her phone rings, jangle, 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 and she leaps out of bed and she says, find my clothes. So I was handing her clothes while she was getting dressed, and I was scrambling in her purse to find her keys. So she got dressed, and she says, I only have 2 minutes to get out of here and on the road. And she did. We scrambled to the front door, and as she went past me, as I opened the door, and as she went past, I handed her keys to her car and her purse, and away she went. And so I closed the door, went into the kitchenette where there was a window that showed the parking lot where our cars were. And I saw her run to the car, and she jerked open the door and got in and jammed the key in, and as soon as the engine caught, she was screeching out of the parking lot and heading off to the northwest. Well, I stood there for a second, and I started to look out a little bit farther, and I could see a lot of lights here and there. And from up on the second floor, I could kind of see what was going on. And there was several other cars headed out toward the northwest. I could see some lights out there too. It's like there's something going on at the mountain. I don't know what it was, but there were lights flashing, and I could see some faint indication of this whole knot of cars making the turnaround to the west on the north side of that mountain. And then I kind of now have another part of the story. 40 minutes into this story. Hope you don't mind, but I'm going to go for an hour, and then I'm going to try to get this published and go on with the second hour. The story is about 50,000 words as I wrote it. Probably twice that with me talking it. But at any rate, part of the story that I didn't know until later is up in West Virginia, there's a Green Bank radio telescope complex. And out of this barracks, all of a sudden the lights come on and the door slams open. 3 GIs come boiling out of this dormitory, and one guy ran over to the driver's door of this looked like a brand new black SUV, and the two other GIs piled into the van, and by then he had the engine running and threw gravel all over everything and just sort of tore off down the road. And got over to it only took him like 30 seconds or a minute to get to this building out where the antennas were. It's like a block building, and he slid to a stop, and the driver piled out, but he wasn't closest. One of the other guys was closer to the door, and so he was sprinting. Ran over to the door, opened the door, slammed it open, and the other guys went inside, and the lights came on, and over to the side of this building was a set of antennas that looked like they were all slaved. They kind of looked like they were all pointing in exactly the same direction. And out of this building, all of a sudden there was some fan noise. And if you've ever heard GI 400 hertz ventilation fans, you'll know what I'm talking about. These things, they woo, and they wound up going almost inaudible. They were such high frequency, and it's like if you're close to them, it'll hurt your ears. So all of a sudden, then there were like woot, 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 and then some bumping noises, and those are called amplitudes, and what they are is they're high-powered motors that can control high-powered motors on the antenna array. So these 6 amplitudes were controlling this antenna array and slewed to the southwest and sat there for a second, and then slowly went up to the zenith and then jammed back down to near horizontal and did it again. Did this 18 times. Well, same time this was happening, there was a guy named Joe Walsh. He was a kind of a local guy who lived up to the northeast of Middletown. And he was kind of like a farmer, and he had injured himself, put a kind of a nasty gash on his leg. And sometime in the past, a month or so, a couple of months, And his doctor told him that what he needed to do is he needed to do a lot of walking. So he was out walking this night. And he was looking out toward, it was about 3:30 in the morning. And he looked out toward Middletown, and he could see all of a sudden a whole bunch of car lights headed out to the northwest. So he was watching all this activity, and he looked over toward the mountain, and he could see way off in the distance a bunch of these flashing lights, but he could see the cars headed out on this county road going down the side of this mountain. So he was near the top of a mountain that's called Turkey Knob, I believe. It was a few miles northeast of Middletown. So he got up on a grassy bank, and he sat there and took his backpack off with his nighttime lunch. He had gotten in the habit of hiking at night, and a lot of times what he would do is he would go back home about breakfast time, and he and his wife would have coffee together, and he would regale her with stories about what he had seen during the night. He thought, well, this night I'm going to have some real concrete stuff to tell her. So he got his backpack off, and he was watching this stuff, and he says, looking out toward the mountain, and all of a sudden there was a bright light that erupted out of the interior valley of this mountain, and it was like it was on rails. It went straight up, a really, really bright light, straight up. He watched it until it went out of sight, and it only took a few seconds for it to get out of sight. And then in his peripheral vision, he says, "Oh, there's another one." Boing. So he followed the second one up, and when the trail ended, he thought there was something like 17 or 18 of these things. Kind of lost track of the count because he wasn't expecting it. So it was kind of like, this is an interesting development, and he thought this would be his first report to the firm in quite some time. So presumably he wrote a report. The colonel, standing in his office and talking into a video monitor, and he was just being bombarded by questions. "Yes, sir. No, sir. Sir, we just didn't have time to deploy. It was all over inside of 35 minutes, and the drive from Middletown takes 40. We thought the moon location gave us some small advanced information, but they outguessed us again. They usually initiate shortly after midnight, but delayed it well beyond what we thought they were capable of. Yes, sir. No, sir. Yes, sir. We were able to track the initial trajectory and found they all headed for the P45 lunar orbital point and did a slingshot from there out to L5. Yes, sir. 18. Yes, sir. We will update when we get new info. We have a tracking crew on 3 shifts for the time being. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Well, Mac went back to bed, and he woke up, and it was really quiet. He could hear the clock ticking over the stove, and it was like the whole town had gone to sleep. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, and he sat up as he struggled to the day he thought he was dreaming. His surroundings and yesterday's activities, and especially the middle of the night, had him confused. He needed coffee. So he prepared coffee, and even ripping the coffee bag open seemed to be just about the limit of what he was capable of. He looked out the window, and he could see the XB Scion was the only car in the parking lot. It wasn't a dream. He thought there was just something out of whack. So after he got dressed, he drove kind of a short distance over to this early morning coffee shop, breakfast club, and had breakfast. And he really enjoyed that breakfast. One of the waitress who was taking care of him was really verbal. She liked to talk. Well, in fact, she was spirited and talked incessantly. And it suited Mac just fine, as the quiet he had experienced trying to get himself started that morning was unnerving. He says her name was Nadine. Nadine even mentioned that she noticed some unusual activity in town during the night. And then she just sort of stopped talking about that and started talking about the local basketball team. Mac asked her if the mountain to the west had a name. And she said, yeah, it's Stag Hammer. She says it's somehow associated with the initial Indian tribe inhabitants. She says she had no other info about it because it was a creepy place, and offhand didn't know anybody who actually lived there. So after breakfast, Mac got gas and headed out to the northwest. He enjoyed a leisurely drive to the Mid-Mountain Gate. He was in his Scion. And he drove to the Mid-Mountain Gate. He found out through the data pad that Sharon had given him what the name of the place was, Mid-Mountain Gate. Well, he turned off the county road, and the light was green, and he drove right on through. And he says, I don't know how this is, but somehow they recognized me, and now I've got free access to the mountain. Okay, figures that they're watching, so next time I come through, I'm going to wave to the gate. Give somebody a charge. He got up on top of the mountain, and he stopped at the lay-by and got out of the car. He stepped around the front of the car, and another vehicle was coming up the mountain and going outbound, and he says all he could see was an arm with a hand waving at him. So he waved back, and he thought that, well, the word gets around. Somebody knows me anyway. So, well, that was a surprise. He says, am I under surveillance? Was that Mid-Mountain Gate monitored? Or, a lot of things going through his mind. He continued to the overlook and then looked out to the east and located his property. said he almost giggled when he thought he had just bought 1,400 of Arkansas land with a ready-to-go farm. He suspected he would find that he was the proud owner of some sheep and goats hiding up in the woodlands of his part of the mountainside. From this distance, there was no way that he could see anything from that distance. So since he was going to have to figure out a name for it, Mac's Shack, the Mac Ranch, the Flying M, didn't want to name it something that indicated self-aggrandizement. No. He looked at the quadrangle off in the distance, and he was able to discern the property boundary. It appeared to be a clear-cut area on the quad line. He estimated it could be as much as 10 yards wide for the whole boundary. From this distance, it appeared to go on for miles. He thought that would be a good exercise path. Well, yeah. Interesting. He looked at the nearby trees, which he thought he could reasonably be representatives of the trees on his property, and he could see a lot of old growth, mature trees. But there was some new growth. He thought that was an indication of a significant bat population. Bats are known for spreading tree seeds far and wide with their feces. You heard it here. His attention shifted to the Center Valley area he had noticed during yesterday's visit. He was surprised to see, among some of the straggly bushes and trees scattered here and there, was some signs of significant recent vehicular traffic. Those tracks weren't there yesterday. Some of those tracks were also larger evidently than regular car size. Tracked vehicles? Small car on a gravel lane way off to the right, which would have been to the west, caught his attention. Car was headed for a farmhouse. It was on the limit of visibility. You could tell there was somebody there, but couldn't see any details of faces or anything. But the car pulled up in the grass in front of the house, and as this person got out of the car, you could see that detail. He said it looked like he looked toward me. I don't know how he could see that from there, but he almost thought he should probably go hide behind the car. But then he thought, there's no way you can see me up here, like I can barely see him. So at any rate, the guy stepped away from the car and got up on the front porch. It looked like he looked at him again. And Max sort of got down a little bit, but didn't go any farther. So at any rate, it's about an hour. Well, I'm going to stop this for now, and when I come back, I'm going to talk about. I'll start to talk about what else he saw that morning in the valley, the Staghammer Valley.